Strohm from Robert Bosch in Stuttgart, Germany. I'm a work package leader in the Quantum Coordination and Support action. And I would like to use the next 10 or 15 minutes or so to explain to you the governance structure of the flagship. So I would like to start with this view graph on the right side. You have seen this already several times today. It's basically three columns. You have the intelligence gathering on the left side. In the center, you have decisions making and advice. And on the right side, you have the implementation. So I would like to start with the center column. This is the European Commission and the Board of Funders, and they are doing the decision making. And then we have the Strategic Advisory Board, which does not exist yet, but in a few weeks it will decide. We already talked about this also. So the role of it is to monitor the progress of the Quantum Flagship, to prepare and update the strategic research and innovation agenda, and to report regularly to the European Commission and the Board of Funders. So this is going to be a group of 15 high-level, renowned independent quantum experts, 6 from academy, 6 from industry, and 3 from regional technology offices. So on the next slide, we go to this right column, which is the implementation. The implementation is the Science and Engineering Board, all the projects of the flagship. You know, we have 20 projects now, and also the Quant-Era project. So the Science and Engineering Board is composed of the project coordinators of all the Quantum Flagship projects. Then there are the 2 Quant-Era program coordinators, which attend as observers. And then we have 2 project coordinators, which have been elected by Quant-Era. On the next slide, I will show you a list of all the members. The SAB has been constituted already in Vienna in November last year. And they also elected chair and vice chair. Chair is Thierry Debuisschert and vice chair is Stephanie Behner. So the most important objective, I would say, is to coordinate all these 20 quantum flagship projects and identify collaboration opportunities. The terms of reference say that the SAB may establish its own rules and procedures. So then the next, you see this bottom layer here is the coordination and support action. The coordination and support action implements the secretariat of the Quantum Flagship. It assists all the other governance bodies and organizes events like this one here as a co-organizer. So until end of next month, this will be the Quantum Coordination and Support action, which will finish end of next month. And from the beginning of April, it will be Q-Flag, which is led by Markus Wilkens. So here you see a list of all the 20 Quantum Flagship projects, together with the project coordinators, which are part of the Science and Engineering Board. Then we have representatives from Quant-Era and also the program coordinators of Quant-Era. There's also the QCN chair is also participating in the SEB as an observer. As I said, chair and vice chair are Thierry Debuisschert and Stephanie Behner. So the next column that I would like to present is the stakeholders column, the quantum technology community. In the center of the quantum technology community is the Quantum Community Network Board. And the Quantum Community Network Board represents the quantum technology community in all the unions, member states, and associated countries. There is the Quantum Flagship Community Organization, which I will talk about in a few slides. And here you see a big list of tasks and responsibilities. One is identify, engage, involve the relevant national stakeholders. Then They have to represent the stakeholders towards the quantum flagship. They collect and share information, best practices on quantum technology relevant activities. They endorse the quantum flagship's strategic research and innovation agenda to ensure the alignment of the national community activities, which is challenging but very central and important task. Help coordinate the interaction and program harmonization between quantum flagship and the national initiatives. And they have to act as a go-to person for all questions related to the quantum flagship in their national community. Last but not least, they also make proposals to the Strategic Advisory Board on the creation and discontinuation of work groups. I will come back to this also later, of the community organization. So the Quantum Community Network Board reports to the Strategic Advisory Board here, and also to the European Commission and the Board of Funders at least twice a year. And the composition is one member and a deputy member per member state and associated countries. These need to be high-profile experts in quantum technology. They need to have, obviously, a large network in the national quantum technology community. In order to prevent conflicts of interest, they must not be part of the Science and Engineering Board, nor the Strategic Advisory Board. It is also constituted. I will show you a list of the members. The chair, the elected chair, is Thomas Calarco, and the vice chair, Yasser Omar. They have a 4-year mandate, and they meet 4 times a year. Actually, they meet once a month. So here you see a list of all the members. Most of the countries, they have a member and a member's proxy. You see there are still a few missing names. This is updated as of beginning of this month. So now let's come to the Quantum Flagship Community Organization. So the participation is open to individuals active in research and innovation in quantum technology in Europe on a professional basis. Then there are the representatives of special interest groups of consumers, end-user industries, European cluster organizations, other European entities. And in order to become a member, in order to participate, you submit an application to the Quantum Flagship Secretariat using this link. This is the flagship page that Tommaso already has shown this morning. I suppose that many of you already did this application for membership. And once you are a member, you participate and contribute to the mission, in particular by participating in 1 or maybe 2 work groups. The assemblies are held once a year. Today, or this week, is such an assembly. So now the work groups. So these work groups are the center of activity regarding the strategy development, and clearly one of the most important activity regarding to this goal is this strategic research and innovation agenda, the SRA working group, which is led by Rob Thu. And then we have another working group, the innovation working group, led by Thierry Debuisschert. So these working groups, this is not necessarily something very static. So the Strategic Advisory Board can recommend to create new work groups. They also are able to discontinue work groups that are not necessary maybe anymore. Okay, so each work group has 2 chairs representing academy and industry, and these chairs have a 2 years mandate. If you want to know more details about these terms of reference, we have 2 documents which detail the whole structure and define exactly what the different boards' obligations are. Then you can look onto our website, once again, qt.eu. We have 2 documents. One is the QFS Terms of Reference, which is issued and controlled by the European Commission, which covers the European Commission's part, Board of Funders, SAB, SEB, and the Coordination and Support Action. And then we have another document, which is the Quantum Flagship Community Organization Terms of Reference, which you can find at the same place. It covers the Quantum Flagship community, the QCN, and the work groups, basically this whole left column. So that's it. If you have some questions, go ahead. Thank you.
Any question at this stage? So if not, thanks, we may proceed.
Okay.
Hello. Good evening. Oh, yes. So, so you are coming to a scientific conference and you are sitting through these sessions and you say, oh my goodness, how boring can that be? And do I really have to sit through this whole bureaucracy stuff? And that is understandable. However, there is also some good advantage in doing bureaucracy, because bureaucracy brings money. And so I wanted to tell you about the next couple billions which arise from the bureaucracy that Thomas has just presented. And hoping that it works, maybe, yes, maybe not, who knows. Oh, here is beautiful, but there should be my presentation here, which I sent today. So which one is it? Oh, I sent it today. It was Calarco QCN. You know that I sent it today to you, and it is the first one which arrived. It was on your computer. I don't know. I don't think so. But who knows? Maybe yes. No, I don't think so. No, because it was like this one. Okay. Okay. So my presentation did not appear on this computer. It was on a different computer which I sent it today, but the presentation is not there. So what I'm going to do is to tell you, well, why you should care about this QCN. And the reason why you should care about this QCN is really that this is the way, well, one of the ways for each one of us to bring our voice and to make it heard at the level of the European Commission and Board of Funders. But perhaps more importantly, because of course there are other ways where you also have fun, you discuss science, that is the Strategic Research Agenda Working Group, you think what are the important topics, what should come in the next round of funding, how should it be working. And this one seems a little bit more abstract and just, governance and just political. But it is very important because this is really one channel that we as a community can use and actually used, and I will show, assuming that some of my slides will show up, we are using this to make sure that really, the flagship is continuing. So let me tell you, while we are waiting for this, a little story, okay, which is not on the slides because really is about how this discussion is developing. We have heard today in the Commission's presentation that, of course, the discussion is still ongoing about the next framework program. So what does mean the next framework program? Well, of course, now there is Horizon 2020, and then there is Horizon Europe, which would be FP9, the Framework Program 9, which is due to start in 2021. And of course, this has to go through a lot of passages, because one passage is that the Commission makes a proposition, and they say, we would like to have it like this. And then in parallel, the Parliament discusses that and proposes amendments, okay? And then there is something which in Brussels is called the trialogue, because amongst normal human beings, you have dialogue. In Brussels, that's not sufficient, so you have the trialogue. And the trialogue is where you have the Parliament, the Commission, and the Council of the European Union. And what is the Council of the European Union? It is a body in which the ministers of research of each of your countries, they meet together, and they tell what the member states want. And all of this goes through a complicated process, And it is very easy to get lost in that process. So why am I telling you this story? Because due to the QCN existing, we didn't get lost in that process. In particular, there was initially, well, you may remember that those of you who were in Vienna may remember that the Director General of DG Connect, Roberto Viola, in Vienna announced that the Quantum Flagship is going to continue as a flagship. And now you may say, oh, what an exciting statement. They said that we do the flagship for 10 years, and now we are in the third year, the first year, the first 3-year stage, and they say, oh, the flagship is going on as a flagship. And you may say, well, what's the point? And this is, oh, fantastic, amazing. And then, but let me finish this brief story. And this is extremely non-trivial, okay? Because until 2.5 weeks ago, it was all but sure that our flagship would survive as such. It could be erased, or turned into a mission, or cut in half, or any combination of those. Instead, our Director General has kindly said in Vienna that it would continue as a flagship, and this was the line of our Directorate General, DG Connect. But other parts of the Commission, I will now not specify the details, were not necessarily of this idea. They wanted to have a mission, which would mean that instead of doing quantum technologies, now we do like a man on the moon thing, and we just do quantum computing. And the rest, bleh. Or it could be a partnership, which again you say, I mean, what's the matter? A partnership would be a situation in which the Commission comes together with member states and they put together the funding and they fund something together, which sounds great, right? But the trick, if that would happen, would be that a partnership would go into a part of the budget which would be capped to a certain amount of money, which would be to be shared among, about 15, if not 20 different topics, and then we would have to fight for survival from the ground up. So the statement, is the flagship continuing as a flagship, which to any normal being seems trivial, yeah, is very far from trivial. And only 2.5 weeks ago, we got a first confirmation officially that now the official position of Parliament, Commission, and Council is we will continue as a flagship. And I will show you some amendments that we prepared to that effect. And why is this relevant in the context of this presentation? Because it was via the QCN, it was via our governance that we managed to get it. So let me tell this story a little bit, hoping that maybe now even the pointer will work. Fantastic. So what is the QCN? Well, Thomas already explained that. It's about engaging, representing, collecting and sharing information, research agenda, go to people, make proposals to the scientific strategic advisory board. And the last line is the one that I was telling you now. Liaise with the Commission and Council, the program committees and the board of funders. So this is really where the decisions are made. And of course, those decisions are made by the Commission and by member states. It's not us who make that decisions. However, the good point is that this QCN is made out by experts which their respective governments trust. In your country, your government will talk typically about quantum things with your QCN member. So that's an important person because the government listens to them, and when they make up their mind what they like to do in the future, then here is a concrete possibility to make sure that this converges into something that ensures our survival for the future. So here is again the list of the members that I showed today. Here's the governance structure that I showed today, and I can skip this quickly because I already spoke a lot. Here comes something which is interesting. So you see, here we have about the budget. Okay, so there is the budget for the next framework program, which is being discussed. We don't know because there will be elections, so we don't know what the new parliament will decide, what the new commission will decide, but the current proposal by the commission is 120 billion euros, and at least 1 billion euro is to be dedicated to quantum research. This has been, which I had presented in Vienna as a hypothesis, a proposition, something, this in the meantime has been voted by the plenary of the European Parliament. It is a proposal for a law by the European Parliament. And then this is relevant because in the amendment that the Parliament put, we are named explicitly. And mind you, many other fields in this framework program are named there with a percentage, okay? And we are named with a number, which again, any sensible person who can do arithmetics will say, what is the difference, yeah? But there is a big difference, because once the new parliament will come, then they may say, okay, we reduce this and this number, and if they reduce that number, then the budget for other things which are tied by percentage to the general budget will automatically be reduced. Not so for quantum technologies, okay? Because they managed to put this as a full number, so of course the parliament can change it again, and so on, but this is as solid a statement as it is possible to achieve, and again, this is something that we were able to bring due to the broad consensus at pan-European level that we have in our governance. So here is another point, which is this time not for the framework program, but also called the specific program, which is where they go more in detail, of course, as the name says, about how you organize and manage things. And this is an entire section among key enabling technologies devoted to quantum, which we wrote based on the input from the whole community, and Parliament approved. And on this basis, there was a lot of discussions, which I do not need to summarize now, but in Council, really, we have to be thankful to all of those QCN members, which took, I mean, it is really an enormous amount of time which is invested in trying to get and talk to your government. And then, as a result, the Council said, okay, the flagship should continue as such, meaning we don't have to go through the whole machine once again, but it will be continued. Of course, this is not yet official, as Gustav Kalbe said this morning, because it needs to be officially approved, but it is as good as it can get at this point. So, well, another point in which the Quantum Community Network was very effective was to bring, so when we say bring the voice of the communities, what does it mean? It sounds very pompous, it sounds very bureaucratic, whatever. It sounds very political maybe. But here is a concrete example what it means politically. Because after the ramp-up phase, of course, there were happy people having gotten their money and less happy people not having gotten money for which they applied for. And of course, the success rate was limited because there was a lot of subscription to the call. And so, well, there were, if you wish, winners and losers. And then, the question is the losers, so the people who would be unhappy, would be the majority. And this is the concern with which I started the Vienna conference, because now we are in a stage in which some people are funded. So the big danger is that the rest of the community disengages and says, oh, it's no longer my thing. They are going to do that. It's a closed club. This would be very dangerous, and this slide shows why. Because even though the Commission had selected some topics, and they did it not because they liked some topics and they did dislike others, but they did it because they followed the procedure which we as a community wanted. We wanted them to have an open call. So they made an open call, there were reviewers, and then some projects were ranked. And of course there was not money for everybody, there was not money for all topics, meaning that some topics were out of the game. Not because the Commission decided they are not important, but because this was the result of the ranking by the referees, which is the procedure that we wanted to happen. The Commission could have said, okay, that's fine, this was the 150 million that you got, that's it. But once again, through our QCN, so we discussed that these were some topics which were very important, because the community indicated that some of the topics now is, for instance, semiconductor qubits for quantum computing and software were important and were not funded. They are not funded in a ramp-up phase. And the Commission, as I mentioned today, did something very exceptional, which is create another call during this 2-year stage in which normally they don't discuss calls anymore, so they changed it again. Okay, and so there are more resources. The important thing is not so much there are more resources, because 20 million, I mean, it's not negligible, it's great. But the point I want to make is that these resources are coming out because the Commission listened to the input that we as a community gave, mostly through the QCN, to the program committee and to the Commission services. And as a result, we have something which now is going to definitely improve the balance in our flagship, which is, for me, a big testimony to the fact that if it doesn't work this time, okay, if we keep arguing and thinking together, not just everyone for their own interest, but as it happens in a collective way, and we all pull in the same direction, then things get moved. And so this is the reason why we created the Quantum Community Network, in order to enable such things to happen. And we are very happy to be able to report that some of these things happened, and we expect that the discussion, which is not yet concluded, as I mentioned, but will have to go on and on, that this discussion can still be, steered in a desirable direction via the voice of our community being heard by decision makers. Again, we don't make decisions, but those are the experts which the national governments ask when they are preparing their national position. And those are people who both can talk to your minister and you can talk to. And many of them are here, and we are going to have a meeting of this QCN in 2 days. And so this is really a very direct way in which we, as a whole community, can influence the process. So this is something which I know looks boring, looks politics, is not fun, is not science. I can tell you, it's not fun. It's really not fun. But it can bring something which then will, produce some more fun activities. So I think this was my last slide, yes, and that's it. So now, should someone ask if there are questions, or before, after, I don't know. We have a plenary discussion, I forgot that.
So now we would have a plenary discussion regarding all these topics that have been presented now. So I would invite Jürgen Mlynek, Thomas Calarco, Gustav Kalbe, Thierry Debuisschert, so I hope you have questions now regarding all these topics that we have been talking about. So who is starting with questions? Something's unclear regarding the role of the boards of the Quantum Flagship governance. I don't see. There was a question? Ah, yes.
Other than continuing to get funding, what would be regarded as a success for the Quantum Flagship? Other than continuing to get funding from the government, what would be regarded as success for the flagship?
That's him who has, well, first you are the government, so please.
Well, I'm not the government, but we're the ones that for the moment are funding the lion's share of it. I mean, the success of the flagship is not just leveraging more funding. We have created this initiative quite a while ago. It wasn't just done overnight. It was not an easy process because we're completely changing the rules of the game. We had been funding fundamental science in this area for the last 20 years, since 1999. The first big structured funding program in this area in the whole world, and we've, I think, invested something more than 500 million there. And we have come at a stage where now you can cash in on this investment. I mean, we have been using taxpayers' money not just for the fun of it. Now it's really time to take the value out of that and bring this towards the economy, creation of jobs, products, applications, building an industry, which for the moment is not established yet. So we have really an opportunity there to cash in on the brilliant science that we have developed and that we still have, to conquer a technology field that has huge prospects and where we see all around the world similar initiatives taking place, because the race is on, but there's no winner, and we can bring back a number of competences that in areas like information technologies we have lost because in the past we underinvested in these areas and we didn't have a structured approach. So we are defining a number of what we call key performance indicators that will keep telling us to what extent we're living up to our expectations. So there's a pressure on the projects to constantly deliver solutions that are moving a TRL level up the layer, but we're also counting on unexpected spin-offs, new areas coming in. We had the discussion this morning about who are the participants in this field, and we see a growing base of, let's call them industrial users that so far were never interested in quantum because it's not in their product line, but even logistics companies like Volkswagen, I mean, SAP, you would imagine is a logic candidate, but DHL, you wonder why they're now actively interested in looking for quantum. So we measure the success of the flagship not on the level of funding we're raising, but really on the concrete output that we're generating. And concrete output can be from patents down to commercial products, spin-off companies, jobs, etc.
Yes, and we were speaking about a KPI for projects, and we are also defining benchmarks which will allow us to measure the progress of the project and to compare the output of the different projects, compare different platforms. All of this will be important for the success of the projects.
So what would you define as a success for the flagship?
Well, reading into your answer a little bit, it sounds a little bit like you want this to become a little bit self-funding, like if the industry took an interest in what you're doing here and you could reap some money from patents and things like this. For me, for myself, I don't really have a say here, but I think my general interests as a scientist are more finding new technologies and not just taking existing theory and moving it into the industry, but then also finding absolutely brand new ways of doing things and thinking about science.
Maybe I can also add a remark. Of course, if you have a project from, I don't know, a research funding organization in general, you look at the published papers, the invitation to talks at international conferences and so forth. So that's well established. I think here we really have to develop together some set of parameters that at the end really give an idea whether this initiative has been a success or not. So what we rely on, or what the SAB probably will rely on, is input of, let's say, benchmarks and key performance indicators and so from the Science and Engineering Board in relationship to the funded projects that they coordinate, but maybe Thierry can also say some more words on that. Because we discussed this also in another meeting this morning. And then, of course, of the Quantum Community Network. I think the SAB, if the SAB should give advice to the Commission, has to rely on input from the community. But it's not only science, it's this, cooperative effort of science and the private sector. And again, it's not so obvious which kind of parameters you end up with to measure the success. Is it the number of patents? Is it the number of licenses given out? Is it the number of startups and so forth? What about the larger companies? Did they create additional departments for these type of activities and so forth? It's not obvious. So they are the usual suspects in terms of indicators and success factors and so forth. But I think we have to do more here.
From the perspective of companies, what would be, of course, a very good, important impact of the flagship would be that if are we able to develop a product, a solution based on quantum technologies, which has no classical counterpart in the classical field. And this would be, of course, the breakthrough, and this is what we are looking for. Of course, there are some prospects, but these are still to be established, and this will be a strong effort of all the industries involved in the flagship projects to reach this kind of goal.
Let me just close the question. I understand you're interested in fundamental science, and I mean, this is very good. The Commission always said that irrespective of the existence of the flagship, there's still a lot of be done in fundamental science, and Commission will keep funding also fundamental science in quantum. However, this is not the core mission of the flagship. So we're not going to measure the success of the flagship primarily on new scientific breakthroughs. The mission of the flagship is moving towards innovation, moving up the TRL level, and fundamental science will be supported either at some other place or in conjunction with the flagship, but not as its primary objective.
So further input? Yes, please.
Well, I want to ask whether there have been really new ideas coming from the political decision makers which were unexpected, which were looking for new applications, or really some ideas which we had not conceived before, whether they come up with some additional things that, because now quantum technology became so much broadly known, and do they have some additional ideas what we should do?
I can give you an example which came from the Federal Minister for Education and Research. She was previously in, I think, something more social, let's say. And so something which was relevant there was what do you do with your retirement funds? And you say, quantum retirement funds? But then it appears, and I learned that through discussions in the ministry, that portfolio optimization for finance is something in which companies, also big investment banks, are looking for quantum computers to get improvement. And this is certainly one example, which is, I'm saying, just because it is from my perspective, is just a niche. Also, perhaps because I think I'm young, which of course is not true. So, but soon I will need to worry about those things. But somehow, I mean, it is not something which would be on my radar. But instead, it's something which can have a broad significance, and it really is coming not just because it was from the ministry, but it really is coming from pull. It's not a technology push, okay, but it is the pull from the users, yeah. And developing more use cases and listening to what they need is really something which I see is coming up now. We had a kickoff meeting of our quantum simulation project, and there were companies such as Airbus, and I already knew that Airbus is interested in this, and Thierry Bottel was there. But there was also someone from Électricité de France, okay, and they are looking into optimizing networks for distribution of energy. And so a lot of these things from our scientists and fundamental scientists' perspective, those are small and maybe not so significant, but they move huge market, they involve, they impact the life of many, many people. And actually, this is probably where one of these will be one of the main breakthroughs of really applying quantum technologies, It is known that the transistor was not developed for creating any digital device, but for creating hearing aids, which is a completely niche application which impacts very significantly the life of a large number, but restricted number of people. And so one of the questions is, and it connects to what Thierry said, what will be the next quantum hearing aid? And I can tell you that if you ask me this question like 5 years ago, or maybe even 4 years ago, I wouldn't know what to say, because we had not yet started really this engagement with end users and trying to find use cases. And now this is really starting in the last few years, and I see a lot of it coming up. And this is, for me personally, also intellectually, I should say, one of the enrichments of this flagship, and from the point of view of the funding institutions, is really something which is necessary to make it worthwhile to have funded it us with so many millions for so many years.
Thank you, Thomas. Let me just start one point. I mean, of course, regularly, our political level, they come with a very concrete question. Say, I have here a huge problem. How can your community, how can this technology help me? But most of the case, it's not the political level that we say, this is the use case that you must do. Otherwise, why would we install something like the Strategic Advisory Board? That is the interface between the community at large, that has to elaborate what they can do, and then respond to the question of the policy. I mean, just to give you a very concrete example, but you might be considered pulling by the hair, is how can certain technology help in solving the migration problem? You might not think about computing. Nevertheless, if you think about simulating or modeling the impact of climate change on rural populations, trying to simulate where people will be moving around, I mean, you can find some use cases, but it's precisely the community through the SAB that will provide the answers to policy questions rather than the policy just inventing everything on their side, because we are not competent to understand what the technology is. That's where we have you for.
I can only second. You are an internal optimist, Ferdinand. Don't expect too much from an administration. And this has nothing to do with Brussels. I think the innovators are sitting here, as Steve Jobs once said at the commencement at Stanford, stay hungry, stay foolish. Have foolish ideas, and then let's talk about it.
If I may add something, the other point is that it's not only about having new ideas for new applications. The other thing is also that we have to implement ideas that we already have, and we have to bring them to market. We have to make products. In the end, the goal of the flagship is to create new jobs in Europe. So, Philippe.
Yes, so here we are mostly speaking about the European flagship, but this morning we heard several things about collaboration with outside Europe, that there will be a CSA, that the US is very active and has huge money, China is very active and has huge and almost unlimited money. So Jürgen has been traveling around. So what is your take on that, about what should be our relationship with our non-European colleagues? Should it be friendly, open science, friendly competition, very bad, strong fight for IP? So what are the guidelines, in some sense, for this progressing in that way, or just working in that way?
So I will give my own non-politically correct answer to that question. And it's divided in two parts. The long-term part, the ideal part, is the one in which I am, maybe hoping or envisioning or imagining that there could be a world in which, to quote one of the rapporteurs of the framework program, actually, Mr. Ehler from the European Parliament, it's not about everybody building their own rocket and sitting on their own rocket and going up and, racing who gets first. Because clearly you can achieve things in a better way in cooperation. And perhaps in a longer term this can happen, and actually it is my own personal credo that what we do at science level can really help international cooperation and maybe create even factors of, I don't know, maybe even peace across countries. I mean, on Friday, I will fly to Sochi in the Soviet Union, former one. And I am going to have dinner, if all goes according to plan, with the advisor of Mr. Putin for science. And I know that several colleagues have a little bit of an allergic reaction when I say that, but I do believe that building bridges is something that can help in the long term. Okay, so this is the long-term part of the answer. At the same time, I also think it would be foolish, not in the good sense, to be naive and to assume that all of the governments which are on Earth in this very moment, before this asymptotic ideal state is reached, have benign intentions and are, willing and they wishful to cooperate with us in, harmonious terms. And so from this point of view, I can completely follow and also support, I should say, the position of the European Commission, which says, well, let's address international cooperation with some select countries and let's restrict it, at least for the moment, to fundamental science. For instance, with the United States, what I mentioned today is we started a discussion on the fundamental quantum science level with the White House and with the Department of State and Department of Energy, in order to perhaps explore something in this direction. I also see that the Commission, in their call for the International Cooperation Coordination Action, what they envision is cooperation with some countries, such as the United States, Canada, Japan, and not with all possible countries. Unfortunately, this reflects the non-ideal situation at the geopolitical level that we have, but I can understand, and I support that, while also I think at the same time scientific cooperation that we can have on the individual level with people anywhere in the world can one day lead to a better future.
Yes, but Tommaso, you answer as a scientist, as I would answer also. When I read documents, I don't know whether you had a look to the document on quantum technology by the Trump administration. There is nowhere the word Europe. They barely speak about foreign countries. Okay, so you see, and many governments, when we speak with them, are worried about what we call souveraineté en français. It's our sovereignty, which means that basically you must be autonomous by yourself and not depend on others for strategic agendas. And so there is sort of a, we are moving to the real life or not so scientific life, and this makes things different. This is why I asked this question. Otherwise, obviously, I agree with you on the asymptotic goal. It would be nice to share ideas worldwide, but it's not exactly what you read all over the place, especially about quantum technology. There is really competition, like, being the first, the biggest, the most bigger. And this is, in some sense, a problem we have, no?
If you take, Philip, the three, let's say, powerhouses in that area, the US, Europe and China, I think we are in a more favorable situation concerning international corporations than the US is. I guess you agree that if you talk also to our American colleagues and especially to the administration in the US, there is great reluctancy to enhance cooperations with China. As a matter of fact, it's getting more and more difficult for US colleagues, especially from public institutions, to travel, for example, to China and attend conferences, not to speak of concrete collaborations. I think we are more flexible here as Europe. So I think internationally we can do quite something. Nevertheless, we have also to follow certain rules to protect European interests. And this is something where we need some guidelines, and maybe Gustav can comment on this.
Yes,
but
this
I
is my
think
basic question. What are the guidelines? This is what we don't really
difficult.
know.
Philippe, in your second intervention, you already gave part of the answer. We had said from the very beginning when we established the flagship, there's a direct economic and strategic interest of the Union and from the possible suppliers in Europe. That's why on the question of international cooperation, we have to be very prudent, because we will not accept that we develop something within Europe and then it's taken up, exploited by somebody else. That's why for the moment we said, okay, we are interested in international cooperations. I mean, we would be foolish not to talk to certain regions about the world, but not at all costs. There are a number of conditions that we need to be respected. The first one is reciprocity. Does not make sense for us to go overseas and participate in programs. So if we cannot have same conditions on the both sides. Also, for the moment, we have not established any definite particular cooperation, agreement, strategy, whatever, with any region in the world from the flagship perspective. Our bottom line so far is the flagship has a certain objective moving outside fundamental science. Fundamental science is already happening bilaterally or spontaneously between the different groups. So for us, for the moment, there's no need to intervene there. However, what we now need to see with those regions is in which areas are we missing competences that we could take advantage of the existing somewhere else to accelerate our uptake, to accelerate our developments, and then work out what are the reciprocity conditions on both sides. That's why the coordination support action is primarily meant to go to those regions and say, okay, what is it that you are looking for? What is it that we're looking for? What can each side offer? And then on what terms can we agree? The safest bet is indeed moving towards fundamental science, as it has always been the case. Science is very open, but as soon as we move into more strategic or commercial interest, that's where we're careful, that's where we'll have to put the safeguards. I mean, just to tell you that in a number of programs that we are discussing with high-level scientists in the States that are working or responsible for some strategic projects, before they travel outside their own country, they need the approval of the Ministry of Defense, of External Relations, to ask, can I go to that conference? Because they are considered, how is it, Geheimnisträger? I don't know in English. They are, have knowledge of trade secrets and should not go outside. So we're not there yet from the union side, but I mean, maybe one day you have to ask your Ministry of Defense, can I travel to Miami to see I don't know whom?
Give us your passport, Philippe.
Okay, thank you very much.
Further input, please. Okay.
Yeah, I just keep the same topic, very interesting, raised by Philippe. I think this kind of discussion is based on two a priori not clear hypotheses, that we are the good guys, which is not taken for granted, and that we will do it better than the other regions of the world, which is also not taken for granted. So we may find ourselves in the next few years just begging for collaborations under uncomfortable conditions if we don't lead in these kind of developments. So I think, I don't want to push it too much, but I think these two hypotheses have to be discussed. We are not necessarily the good guys, and we will not be the first to reach the goals. So if we open this discussion, I think that I appreciate the effort, that I follow Tomas's also, let us call it the pure approach to science and to discussions, which I find it reasonable. You see, when people talk to me, I receive funding from the Department of Energy in US. I collaborate with Google, IBM. I collaborate also with Asia. And when people come to speak to me, they speak about headlines in some newspapers. I interact with people. I interact with students, with wonderful, fantastic souls looking for knowledge and developing technology, and interest of companies, interest of academia, institutions. So it is really hard to reduce this to headlines in Twitter or in New York Times or something like that.
I mean, of course, we're all convinced that we're the best in the world. I mean, otherwise we'll not be sitting here. However, it's exactly that point I tried to make on identifying where to move international cooperation, is to take stock, indeed, where are we missing something, and where in the world could we get those on favorable conditions, favorable on both sides, to fill the gap and help us advance. I mean, maybe certain topics we could develop it ourselves and catch up, but the process might be much faster if we can bring in the help from somewhere else. Now that's the precise question. What are we missing and where can we find it, and then under which conditions?
More comments, questions?
Yes.
Hello, yes. What about longer term, not necessarily in terms of technology, but in terms of people? How do you see this affecting early career researchers? Do you think this will help them develop new careers, or Has that really been a consideration or not really?
Well, this is a very big issue because, well, first of all, in terms of personnel, now there are already now essentially more positions than qualified people to, to fill those positions and to carry out the work, at least on the academic side, and most likely also on the industry side, even though, as someone said today, they can offer much more attractive conditions, but nevertheless, I mean, finding people is highly non-trivial. And I would say this question of career perspectives is the biggest one on the academic side at this stage. We cannot solve it with the flagship because the European Commission cannot enter into any university and create positions, professorships, and so on. What we see in the US, we were discussing again with Jürgen Mlynek about this, what we see is that several universities there are being set up and creating senior positions and professorships in the field, which creates career perspectives. I would say that in Europe, I do not see that happen yet. And to me, this, on the academic side, is really the biggest challenge. Not if we have the excellence, but I mean, to the next generation of people, what is the future that we are considering? We can, of course, we can say, you get trained, you do, high tech, deep tech, whatever, and then you move to something else. But I mean, that's not really an argument to say you should come to our field because then you do something else. There should be some perspective within our field. I see this as a very big challenge at the moment.
Let me add a word. I think career perspective is really the key word here. There are quite some possibilities to get support for 5 years. If you have a junior research group, even the ERC grants are like that. You get support for a number of years. The question is, how does this go on? And here, that's something that the university system in Europe has to solve. So this is probably something that has to be solved at the national level.
Somehow I have the sense for this as well as for the education aspect, because also the Commission keeps saying we needed to build skills and so on and so forth, and we have also tomorrow and the day after tomorrow this wonderful workshop with the education working group, and the Commission is asking us if we had 10 to the 8 euros, what could we do with that? But somehow, I mean, this is something that can only take place at regional level, and I'm not sure how we can stimulate that. Actually, I am a little bit at a loss as to how to move that on, and actually this is an area in which really not only ideas but also input on, and help on make this happen at, let many thousand flowers bloom across Europe is very necessary. So maybe this is something that can only come from the community, but still, we would need to provide some, I don't know, some guidance, some coordination for this. We are starting this reflection somehow. This is, as I said before, something that we have to intensify and make better. So it would be good, by the way, each one of the questions that are asked here, especially those which we do not yet have an answer for, then I am very much tempted to bounce them back to all of you, so to ask what would be your ideas, what should we be doing, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. I'm first time here, so I didn't expect this deep discussion actually on the topic, so very thank you for that, first of all. And second, to your last call to action, basically, I want to say, I don't know if you have recognized recently all the meetup scenes growing all over the world. Have you recognized that? So that all over the world there are like independent meetups going on. It's more common in the IT community, I would say, and on different professional subsections. But I looked it up a few days or few weeks ago. There are now a growing number of quantum technology meetups actually growing all over the world, like in all hotspots. And maybe this could be a good thing to connect
we are looking at each other a little lost. because we are apparently, all of us, quite ignorant. Maybe not Gustav, but we are here, the three of us are quite ignorant. Can you explain what that is and where it is taking place?
So actually, it's an app. It's called Meetup.com, or it's a website, a company. I don't know. It's a company.
You are not working for, are you?
No. But I'm a big fan actually. So you can. It's this privately and independently organized events. It's called Meetups. So former not known people can meet and discuss topics. Also, it's on a very professional level. I don't know. Companies like Google and IBM.
It sounds cool.
So they offer their conference rooms in their housings to sponsor somehow, for example, such meetups. It's very common in the IT scene. And now I see that the quantum technologies, there are lots of meetups now growing all over the world, and it's really like a think global, act local thingy it can spread. Maybe the European Flagship can support
okay, so
such
here's
meetups.
my business cards. On it is my cell phone. If you pick it up afterwards, I would be happy to hear from you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Daniel. My apologies.
I just have a quick question. So you mentioned that the percentage of women is very, very low. And I was wondering what kind of plans you have in progress to tackle this. Because, for example, in the Graphene Flagship, we have set up a Women in Graphene consortium. And we organize frequent events to tackle this. Are you planning to do something similar in the Quantum Flagship?
So, first of all, it is extremely inaccurate to say that women percentage is low. It is actually shameful, I think. So low is a euphemism.
Yes.
And yes, do we have something in place? The new coordination action, maybe Marcus can comment on that. Marcus was... Yeah, please. So we have... and there is a working group taking place here on that, and maybe you are still in time to join. Marcus, where are you?
Yeah, I'm here actually. Okay, I'm holding... So we have a dedicated task on this action, and Rob Sue is responsible for this. Rob, would you like to comment directly?
Everybody says someone else.
No, because...
Yes, to put some figure, we have 16% of women in this conference. So out of 6 people here only.
Yes, so in terms of the gender initiatives, we started up, we have a small working group. We're looking to expand on that in terms of the competencies we need. And in terms of understanding where we stand at the moment and what are the best practices to moving forward, we're starting to get in touch with different national initiatives or different research project initiatives. And also just recently in Vienna, there was a meeting with the Commissioner Gabriel, I think, who wants to launch a Women in Flagships initiative, which brings programs from the graphene, human brain, and the quantum areas together to try and find common ground and work together. So there are a few things afoot. There's a lot to do.
But just to comment, so if you have had first experience and successful experiences, I think we could learn from it from the Graphene Flagship.
Yeah, we actually just had a meeting like last week in Manchester. So we organize a career development day usually for women in general in science. So it's not only for people who are involved in the flagship, and also some talks. So this is, I think what your colleague mentioned is that there will be something set up basically among all the flagships. That's
Here's another of my business cards.
Okay.
Okay, further.
Yes, this time Daniel.
I would like to make a point back on the educational track. So it was mentioned a few times that there is a need for developing QT educational tracks. It's despite the fact that there are not that many open positions, as it was also mentioned. I think that the need is not really here. The most important need, and it's important because it would bridge at the same time the research community and the private sector, the need is to teach the engineers who are in the companies who are presently thinking of developing quantum technologies. All these engineers, some are maybe not so young, have not been taught with modern quantum mechanics, and certainly not with the second quantum revolution. So they need, and they are interested, and there is a need from the companies, and companies are really asking for, say, lectures and quite high-level lectures and even, say, advanced courses in modern quantum mechanics for really the second quantum revolution that you are aim at developing. So there is a huge need on the international side for forming people who are already working in companies, more even than for master tracks. That we should think of both sides. And it's very important because it's a way to have the best research people teaching the private sector. And I'm sure there are initiatives, possibly all around Europe, that are not so well registered.
So I just could add that I also see this in my company. There's also a demand for teaching about quantum theory or quantum technologies. I see that as well. Maybe I have another question which is also related to what you said. So we were talking several times about open positions in the industry, also internally, but I don't think we have agreement. So that's why I would like to ask you, who is from industry and who has open positions for quantum physicists? 1, 2, so approximately 10. And who is also from industry and who doesn't have open positions? Okay, so this is about 50-50. So I would say there are open positions, but not too many. Yeah. You want to say something? Okay.
Hi, I'm Thomas from BMW. So with us, it's not necessary that there's open positions, but we have workshops with universities, and from those workshops we see potential, and then we have employees who, for instance, start with 20% of their time looking into quantum, and it's gradually increasing like that. So no, not necessarily open positions, but yes, there is career perspectives in that way.
Okay, thanks. Further questions? Okay, there's a question.
I think following on the comment by the gentleman from BMW, a question I would ask is, how much of this is about that people need to be all in on quantum, or is quantum a feature or a capability that someone has in their portfolio to solve problems? And when in industry do you want to position it as you need a quantum expert versus you need people, as the gentleman said over there, who have a certain competency in understanding when to apply classical or quantum methods?
So, do you want to say something?
I would say that there are many, in the companies at the moment, there are many questions arising about quantum technology, and so they need some experts, a few of them at least, and they are trying to do this job in order to answer those questions arising from different places in the big companies. And so this is, we need more people who are competent in quantum technologies in the companies at the moment, but we don't have it. The recruitment in the past years has not been around quantum technology. Sorry?
So he said that at BMW people are already starting to learn about quantum mechanics without having a quantum expert in the company. So maybe yes.
use them.
So it's not necessarily that we don't have an expert. We have the experts externally. We collaborate with universities or with other companies, and they come in and they consult and they try to teach. And from that, the experts that we have on big data or AI learn what the advantages are of quantum and how they can incorporate it into their everyday life or everyday job.
If I might give my part of the answer. We have very good quantum physicists. The question is if you need more quantum physicists now to move into the real life. I mean, if you go to a large company that is building a product, you just need people that can talk to the quantum physicists, but they don't have the physics. If I take a very simple image of programming a quantum computer, now what you have is physicists that shine some lasers on some atoms, put them in a certain superposition state, and then somehow by magic, they run the code. If I'm a user, I don't want to be able to shine lasers. I want just my keyboard, I type my instructions, and there's a compiler behind that translates this into instruction that Tommaso can then put on his lasers. So what we are now looking for are precisely the people that can make the bridge between the quantum physics and the end user experience. Tommaso might remember, I think it was 2006 or something like that, we had a 3 days workshop on quantum in London where we just brought quantum physicists and computer scientists. It took them 3 days to understand. They're talking about the same things, but a completely different language, to really bring together different disciplines to work on the overall system approach, where each part of the chain has his experience, competence. You just need to create the interface that they can talk together, but you don't want that everyone can do everything. And that's, I think, where we should now work on in the flagship when we talk about education, skills, and so on, is precisely move out of the purely quantum physics world into the applied side where you can have the other disciplines that work hand in hand with all you need to have practical and workable solutions.
Maybe I can also add something to this educational aspect. And my question first would be, those who are representing universities, where is there a new curriculum, let's say, on quantum engineering, really bringing together different disciplines, but in form of a new curriculum, also with some kind of degree at the end? Can you please show me 1, 2, 3, 4? Okay, 5. Maybe more is possible, and I can only tell you, and maybe we can discuss this also later on when the beer reception starts. When I was talking to people from the ETH, they said they will introduce also quantum engineering as some kind of curriculum, and it takes some time. So this person was really working on it for already 1.5 and 2 years, and you at the end also need personal resources. So at the ETH, it's under discussion, and I don't know whether it's decided now or not, 2 to 3 additional professorships. So if we talk about additional faculty position, you can justify it through research activities, but at the same time you also have this educational side. And if you put this together, this can make up really a package where you can also go to, let's say, your administration, also to the, I don't know, dean or so, president even of your university, and say, listen, this is something that can be of interest not only for research, but also for the educational side of our institution. And I don't know whether the CSA can be of help here, but I think we also have to not get this training side and educational side out of our perspectives.
Well, we have some task explicitly dedicated to that. So, of course, first we need to understand what is existing already. I think nobody at the moment has a complete picture of what is existing in Europe. And then in the second step, we will make concrete proposals on what is needed in terms of quantum engineering, for instance. So, and if there is a good example at ETH, for instance, this could be transferred to other universities, I guess. We would put this as a proposal to the SAB, which then would be forwarded, I guess, to the European Commission.
So I would like to add to the comment that was made by Gustav and also your comment, these different disciplines in quantum computing algorithms. So at Bosch we have two different activities. One is dedicated to material simulation, and obviously we have a quantum physicist doing that in collaboration with Heisenberg Quantum Simulations. And then we have a different activity which is focusing on use cases in the company. And the question is obviously which use cases could benefit from the use of quantum computers. And here we have people, I mean it's not many people which have a background in computer science, and we have a cooperation with QSoft from Amsterdam. So in this way we solve this problem of these different disciplines in quantum computing algorithms that barely can talk to each other.
You have a question here?
Hi.
Yes.
I'm sorry to play the bad cop here. I'm a little bit puzzled by the discussion, I honestly have to say. So you were talking about potential new positions in academia. Well, I kind of got the impression that part of the flagship is about transferring that from fundamental science or academia science towards industry. So on the other hand, we have kind of an industry starting up. It's a different continent. Obviously, it's the big players in North America. So for people my age, finishing their PhD, looking for a job in their 30s, you have some ideas what you want to do with your life and some restrictions. Yeah? Maybe a startup job is interesting, but will not pay the bill. So at the moment when you're dropping out of that academia and you have that flagship project, which should transfer that to jobs in industry, there are actually not that many jobs in quantum industry because there is not a professional quantum industry. It's mostly startup based in Europe. So if we do compare that to other companies that already exist, the few big companies, for example. So aren't you afraid, coming back to the strategic question that was raised a little bit back, aren't you afraid that you are losing half a generation or a generation of well-educated scientists that after finishing their PhD in quantum science don't see a chance for a decent, halfway well-paid job in an industry that is not there here in Europe? And taking that into consideration, that kind of contradicts a little bit that effort to implant something like a new education perspective on that, to even educate more when there is at the moment not the market for well-educated PhDs. Thanks.
You have a point there. Let me just, the other way around. When I was talking during my stay last week in the US to, for example, Chris Monroe, that's a guy who has set up this IonQ company next to the University of Maryland. Of course, they produce PhDs, also master's students, and they are hired right away into a startup. The same is true for Honeywell, sitting close to Boulder. Nobody really knows what they are doing exactly. Maybe somebody among the audience does know this. But if you talk to guys from GILA or from NIST in Boulder or the university, those who finish in quantum, they are just hired away directly into these companies. And I think we need more of, let's say, these young, fresh startups. On the other hand, there is a labor market for all those who finish in quantum physics, even if they not directly, end up in a job in quantum physics. There are quite a number of companies that already have some activities even if they don't have a quantum division. I think Bosch has activities in that area because they are interested in sensors. Volkswagen has, just to mention some German companies, Thales has activities, Atos has activities, and so forth. Maybe a good idea would be, Marcos, to get some kind of overview of this and then have a website where you just have, you know, also these openings, not only in academia, but also in the private sector. Because as I said, probably there will be enough position in academia, but here the question is, if you have a contract for 3 or 5 years, especially in your age, is there a perspective afterwards? If you perform well, how are institutions dealing with you? So I think we need more transparency.
Just to add, I think we never had the situation that all the physicists that made a PhD also found a job in the industry working as physicists. So this actually would be nothing new. Yeah.
Short comment.
It was not so much about me finding a job. I got one by now. That's not the problem. The problem I strategically see is that you really got well-educated people that now drop out of university, and after 2 years working for a company that is big, like you can take Bosch, you can take BMW. Their core business is not quantum. Their core business is something else. And if somebody's working 2 years in a different business at Bosch, at BMW, a different focus, he's not going back to quantum. He's happy with the good pay he's getting there, and he's designing whatever he's designing there. So my question was on the strategical level, aren't you afraid that you are losing at the moment well-educated people you might need if that industry really picks up?
The answer is yes. And that is a typical bootstrapping problem, okay, or chicken egg, or whatever you want to call it. So if we manage to create a virtuous circle, then this is no longer going to be the case. And if we don't, then it is going to spiral down. And if I look at the international competition, then, you know, I get a sense of even more urgency. And for me, this is just one additional motivation why we must make all these efforts we are discussing here succeed, and quickly.
So, but I really disagree. Just a second. I disagree with Tommaso here. I would say you don't lose people. They stay in the companies, for example, and it has never been such that with a certain degree that you get from the university, you exactly do what you did during your PhD when you join a company. This has never been the case. So in that sense, people are not lost. I think that's not a new situation.
No, sorry, I didn't mean that. Of course, is great. I think what I understood in his question, to which I said yes, is that if this happens, of course, it's great that people we train go elsewhere. But he said, I mean, is there a danger that we do not have enough people to recruit for our undertaking because they all get good perspectives elsewhere, so that we do not have enough qualified people to pursue further the quantum technologies development? I think that is a valid question.
Okay, one question
so
here, next here.
So I would actually go back slightly to what Daniel Esteve was pointing out. I mean, the point, especially in big companies that are going to be early adopters of quantum technologies, is recognizing opportunities. Last week I was at a cybersecurity conference in Italy with Luciano Pizzini, who is the person who brought internet to Italy. Italy is the third country to have an internet. When he was going around asking companies or telling companies about this new idea, they were not interested because they thought that voice is the market, not data. Exchanging data is not a market. is not such a big deal. It's something for universities. So the training of personnel of big companies, or hiring, actually, of young people who will give the big companies that perspectives, is a fundamental ingredient for the flagship then to take over. And then if the flagship explodes, those people will keep on working. If the flagship fails, then we are all in trouble.
Thanks.
There's a question. Ah, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I just wanted to ask, what is the flagship doing to perhaps support more young or scientists to bring their ideas and their work to the market? Are you also working with tech transfers from the universities?
We have an innovation working group, and we are trying to evaluate what we could do in particular to support SMEs or small companies, to provide better outreach, or to make them into contact with the venture capital, or to help them to have contact with nanofabrication facilities to develop small components. And we are trying to foster all those contacts and these interactions. This is a work ongoing, of course.
Okay, my question is regarding to what flagship is pointing eventually, market and industrialization. And in particular, I would like to ask, apart from IT technologies, there is also the hardware level piece, let's say, in the development. So my question is, in order to enter the houses of people, we need compact and room temperature devices. What I noticed that there is really few room temperature integrated technologies that can really go through in the near future. So, I mean, if you want to go into the market, you need a TRL 8, 9, 10, and in 5 years, you cannot start from zero. It is very good to continue fundamental research, but how many technologies exist, if you have the vision on this point, that are at high TRL level, that can soon go into the market, and they are eventually room temperature technologies?
Well, it's difficult to predict in how many years a technology will go into the market, but there are some prospects, for example, for solid state spin defects in diamond or solid state material, which work at room temperature, which are working in ambient conditions, and where there are already some advanced developments which eventually will go into the market. So this is in the field of sensing, but there are prospects to use them, for example, in cars, or to small sensors that could be used everywhere in the outside world, not in the laboratory. There are some prospects for that.
Quantum communication devices function already now at room temperature, the ones which are commercially available. And you know, the ideas about deploying a Europe-wide QKD network is based on that, so that's already there. Well, I wonder whether all commercially available technologies need to be room temperature, because I hear in this thing I am purchasing, when I purchase it, a digital assistant, which is not sitting neither here nor at home. It's sitting in some server farm, which, you know, cooling down is certainly less complicated than cooling down to zero temperature my living room. So I suppose that there can be commercially available technologies which can work at significantly low temperatures as cloud services. This is one of the ideas that are being pursued by putting quantum coprocessors on top of high-performance computers. This is the reason why Google, for instance, is investing in that. They really want to make it available as a service, but they certainly are not thinking to sell it to everyone to carry around.
There is another aspect, I think, coming with your question with respect to these technologies. Of course, let's take quantum computing. You want to have so and so many ions or superconducting qubits working. But you need microwaves, you need lasers, you need modulators, and so forth. There's a lot of technology coming, let's say, with the core part of such a system. And I think what we also have to keep in mind is to develop these technologies similar to the big goals that we are pursuing, because at the end, if we have, I don't know, 100 ions being connected, you have to have some kind of standardized technology that everybody can use to make it happen. So I think there is a broad field of other technologies that can be pushed also via the flagship, which is not evident if you look at it right away, but we need this. And I think Europe is pretty good in some of the areas.
I think we should come to an end. Is there a further question?
Philippe, as I know you, a short one, please.
Yes, it's a short one. It's about the time frame. So we heard about the ongoing operations for the next framework. We heard also about there is these instrument stories, you know, mission, partnerships, flagships, Digital Europe, and all these things. So this is going on. But when will it start really? So can we expect that in January 21 there will be new calls, new things? So what is the real time frame for these things to be clearly defined?
Our intention is to have a seamless transition between the running phase of the flagship and the next one. So if you calculate backwards, it will mean that by the end of next year, 2020, at the latest beginning 2021, we must publish the first calls for the second phase of the flagship to really have this seamless continuation.
And this implies that we would need this process of trialogue and so on going on seamlessly, not only for our framework program, but also for the multi-annual financial framework of the European Commission. And we already know now that this is not happening because the Romanian presidency is slowing down rather than accelerating the discussions on the multi-annual financial framework, which means that we are not going to get the budget in time. It was scheduled to be done now. It is going to be done at the earliest at the end of this year. And so, I mean, we should be working towards this goal, as Gustav said. We should be aware that, you know, it might not be so seamless as our friends at the European Commission would, for our sake, hope to be able to do. And in the meantime, there are some elections in the European Parliament, which, as everybody knows, are not necessarily going to bring the most science-friendly parliament to the fore. And so it can go much, much, much worse than that.
Okay, so I stop asking questions.
Okay, thank you very much for your valuable contributions. Thank you very much to the experts in the plenary. So now, 4:30, the beer event.
Yes, once more an announcement.
Just a very short announcement. There was supposed to be a roundtable discussion starting half an hour ago on atom quantum technologies. And actually one quantum technology that you forgot to mention is the matter-wave interferometers. You can buy already matter-wave interferometers which outperform any classical instrument in measuring gravity in a portable fashion. But there will be the session that was supposed to start at 4 o'clock, will be at 5 in Chromium 1. It's a roundtable discussion on atom quantum sensors, commercially available solutions, and the supply chain. Thank you.
Thanks. Now this time need to go to the beer event. That is the opportunity to discuss all together, also to visit the booth. And for the poster, for the one having poster, check if you are in this session or in the next one starting from Wednesday. This is posted close to the entrance. So see you at the beer event.